And I mean, the argument that we've seen the most, I think, is that, well, Israel has committed all these atrocities over the years as well. So, first of all, there is the argument that, yeah, Israel, they're colonizers, these are settlers, that Gaza is an apartheid state, that Israel has been oppressing Palestinians for decades and decades and decades. Um, and that throughout that whole time, they've been either equally as horrible or worse as compared to the October 7th attack. Is any of that like what's the
Yeah.
what's true here? I
Right.
mean, are Israel, like, the colonizer argument, we could start with that, confuses me because as far as I understand it, Jews have been in that area forever. I
Right.
mean, not
So
literally forever, but for a very, very long, like
right.
almost forever.
So Jews are definitely indigenous to the land. That argument doesn't hold a lot of water with me because I think of things like I think from like a civil rights point of view, like that doesn't give you the right to deprive people of civil rights. It doesn't mean that you can't really colonize a land that you're indigenous to, but
Right.
it's kind of like a that's kind of irrelevant to me morally, like whether or not they have a claim to the land that's historical. Like what's important is that they're there and that they came there after the Holocaust, and that when they came there after the Holocaust, they agreed to split it 50-50 with the Arabs, and the Arabs said no and tried to kick them out. They won that war. I mean, like war happens and people win wars.
Yeah.
So at that point, they won basically what had been the UN partition plan. So they didn't win Jerusalem, and they didn't win Gaza, and they didn't win the West Bank. Are you familiar with like kind of the map of Israel, basically?
I've looked at it over the past week.
Right.
So
so
ish.
So you see there's like a little box, which is Gaza, which is right on the Egypt border with the border
Mhm.
with Sinai.
Mhm.
And then there's the West Bank, which is this kind of cutout. And those are the problematic areas because the rest is sort of, there's the rest of Israel, Israel proper, let's put those aside. 20% of Israeli citizens are Arabs, and they just have full rights. They have 99% of the rights of Jewish Israelis. There's a small, tiny difference in terms of building permits, very problematic, but it's extremely small. They are represented in the government. They've taken over the medical field. I mean, it's like not right to call that an apartheid at all. There's huge representation in the elites of Arab Israelis, although of course always be improved, but and most of them identify as Israeli and would not want to live in any, certainly not in a Palestinian state. They really don't like, I wouldn't say don't like the Palestinians, but obviously there's like a status difference, right? Like if you are an Israeli Arab, you have a certain status that gives you access to full civil rights within Israel. Then you have, so what happened was, so that was in 1948. In 1967, once again, all of the Arab countries started to attack Israel at the same time. Again, they thought there was going to be like another Holocaust. They did not believe there was any way that the Jews were going to survive. And synagogues across America, they were weeping. They were certain that it was, finished. But Israel won, and not only did they win, but while they were winning, they accidentally, this was not on purpose, but they reached that border with Jordan that was called Transjordan at the time, like where the West Bank is. They reached the border and the Jordanian soldiers fled. And so one soldier called his, commander and said, well, what do I do? And he said, advance to Jerusalem. And so he advanced to Jerusalem. They ended up retaking that cutout, and they also retook Gaza. And at that point, things got problematic because they did not give the Arabs who live there citizenship. And so the Arabs who live, let's start with the West Bank. The Arabs who live in the West Bank, they don't have citizenship. They're stateless. And that is very problematic. They don't have civil rights. They don't have the right to vote for the government that exercises state power against them. Now, what Oslo did was it created a mini Palestinian government, the Palestinian Authority, with one of the Palestinian parties. There's two. There's Hamas and Fatah, and this was with Fatah, which replaced the PLO. I know it's like extremely trying to simplify it, but so they sort of deal with municipal issues. They divide it into area A, B, and C. Each of the Palestinian communities there have different legal status, but essentially the Israeli army can still show up at your door if you're an Arab. So the government that exercises state power against Palestinians living in the West Bank, they don't vote for. And that is hugely problematic. Now, they were offered their own state 4 separate times, and they rejected it because they did not accept the parameters of the state. To the Israelis, that signaled that they were not coming in good faith. They would not accept anything less than all of Jerusalem. And, and the chants from the river to the sea suggests they really they want everything back, right?
Right, right.
So there's a real problem here. It's like a chicken and an egg. Their leadership is terrible, is deeply corrupt, clearly benefits from their subjugation. But at the same time, there is a current reality in the West Bank that is deeply problematic. And I mean, I wouldn't call it an apartheid because it's not based on race, but it is very problematic. If an Arab and a Jew get into a fight in the West Bank, the Jew goes to civilian court and the Arab goes to military court. It's very, very bad. And is it Israel's fault entirely? No, it's complete shared responsibility between both sides. But it's bad that Israel is exercising power in that way. Now, to complicate matters further, in 2000, there was what was called the Second Intifada, where they just started this huge fight, just suicide bomber after suicide bomber after suicide bomber. I mean, I remember I was living there. You would get on the bus to go to school and you didn't know if you were going to come home. Like buses were just blowing up right, left, and center.
Oh my God.
1,000 Israelis were killed, this equivalent of 30,000 Americans. And at that point, the Israeli peace movement really died. I mean, everyone knew people who were getting blown up, and they just felt like these people hate us and they'll never want to be our neighbors. And so Israel became right-wing governments started winning at that point in a big way, including Bibi Netanyahu. And now Bibi Netanyahu's philosophy was, so at the same time as all this is happening, there's an election in Gaza and Hamas wins. And Hamas is this terrorist organization that explicitly calls for the annihilation of Israel.
Did the people know that, maybe this is a naive question, did the people know that they were voting in a terrorist group that wanted to essentially kill all Jews and Israel? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think they felt that they would be better at representing their cause. Did every Gazan who voted for Hamas want them for that reason? I mean, at that point, they had a quote unquote political wing. I don't hold that against people necessarily. Like the condition for having civil rights is not, do you have good opinions about Jews, right? Like I'm totally comfortable with people who are not going to kill other people, but wish they could, like, having civil rights, right? Like that's kind of what democracy is, right? I mean, sometimes I want to kill my own husband, like, it happens, right?
I get it.
Right. So they voted in Hamas. Hamas then took all of the Fatah members, threw them off the top of the buildings, and just, both Fatah and Hamas instantiated basically dictatorships. There have not been, elections at all. Right at the same time, Israel decided it had built settlements in Gaza and settlements in the West Bank. So those people, like even somebody like me, would say, well, that was bad because what you were doing was you weren't saying, look, this is a military occupation, it's a temporary thing, we got to figure out how to have peace with these people, and until then we're going to have status quo. That's their official line. But then they sent civilians to live there, which is kind of like putting down roots, right? In a place where you have no intention of giving equality to the other people there. That's very bad. And Israel did do that. Now, is this the worst kind of subjugation that's ever happened to a people's ever? No, it's a pretty benign, most of the time, it's quite benign. There's not a lot of violence. But they are stateless, and that's very bad. And I can understand why they're very angry about it. But what I don't, what seems to me to be like even more upsetting is, like, at this point, like, I would think that people would be like, oh, this is why they were unable to arrive at some sort of like peaceful negotiation with these people, because this is what they were planning to do all along, right? Like, and it's so funny, you'll appreciate this. People used to call the IDF soldiers racist because they never raped Arab girls. And they had a problem with that because they were like, if they really saw them as human, you would hear more stories about this. Like, this is a meme, like, on the left. It's like that they don't see them as, like, that's how messed up this all is, And so I think, to get back to your question, are they colonizers? They're not colonizers. There is a blockade of Gaza and a military occupation of the West Bank. Both of those are not ideal situations, but the blockade in Gaza, I mean, this is why they have it, right? Because they knew that there was this, but didn't know enough, right? But this is who they were blockading, was Hamas and, people who have a genocidal view of Israelis. In the West Bank, it's a lot more complicated, but again, there's a lot of terrorist activity. There's a lot of Hamas activity in the West Bank underground. So does it justify what happened? Can anything justify what they did? I mean, if you're looking literally at what actually happened, could anything justify it Of course not. Of course not. You know, and the statelessness is terrible. It's very important that there be, some solution to the problem in the Middle East, but there are two peoples there, and they are engaged in a national struggle. And
Mhm.
one of them keeps winning that national struggle when it is completely attacked by many, many countries. And to the left, that makes them inherently evil. But that's it. That does not come. I don't think that is like, they hate them because they kept winning. Like, they hate them because they were not wiped off the map. And
Yeah.
there's deep, deep anti-Semitism in the Muslim world, in the Muslim countries. Not here, thank God. In America, I think most Muslims, are nice middle class people who just want to get along with their neighbors. That's been my experience.
Yeah.
But in the Muslim world, they really do not forgive the Jews for not submitting to a second genocide. And I mean, that's it doesn't the fact that they won is the crime here. The fact that they are trying to defend themselves is the crime here. Like,
Yeah.
that's the thing the squad can't stand, is them standing up for themselves and defending themselves. And unfortunately, that self-defense is going to come with civilian casualties.